Jerry Kaufman. I'm an impressionistic photographer. I work behind a camera. I'm photographing in the spirit of the impressionists. So what that means is looking at light, color, and emotion that's evoked in the images that I'm working with. In these this set of images here that are from my Bridge and Urban collection, I'm using the same technique, a technique that was discovered quite by accident over 150 years ago, and it was discovered by accidentally overexposing a negative in a dark room. And what that allows me to do is to flip extreme tones. Now, in simple terms, what that means is making whites black and blacks white. The midtones, well, you'll see here there's some yet reds and browns and greens. Those are muted, but they stick. So some people say, do you have to go back in and color those in? No, I don't have to do that. People, kind of talk about Photoshop in a disparaging way. I don't happen to use Photoshop myself, but it's a tool. It's a tool that helps bring a photograph to life and maybe work with the creative aspects of an artist. And I'm finding that embracing the newer technologies as they come along. But then also I would put a cautionary note out there too. You don't need the latest technology. You don't need the biggest and most expensive camera. And if it's encouraging to anybody, all the images you see in here, I use other cameras today, but these images were all shot with a Nikon D300, which is a mid-range camera. It's a 12 megapixel camera. A lot of people are walking around with more megapixel capability on their phone than this particular camera that these images were shot with. I switched to digital in 2006. I'm a lifetime photographer. I'm a third-generation photographer. Making that switch was initially a little tough, but once made, I've never looked back. I've been carrying a camera around since I was about, maybe up to about my waist. In fact, I was just looking at a picture the other day, a family shot that had a camera around my neck. But it's something that perhaps was in my DNA. One of the most fun occasions that I have is taking my 5-6-year-old grandsons around now with cameras. The actual material that's being used here is these are being printed directly onto aluminum. I've been experimenting with different mediums in terms of putting the prints on. These particular images seem to work very well. It's a high gloss special coating that's put on a thin sheet of aluminum, and a sublimation process, which is a combination of heat and pressure, infuses the photographic dyes right into the metal. Probably the most archival form of a photograph that we have today, 4 to 5 times the fade resistance of a standard photograph, even the best professional quality. When I'm out, as it were, discovering the stories, the untold stories, I'm not trying to find the typical postcard photograph to make and replicate. I'm looking to tell the untold story, looking at something a little bit differently. I'll tell you a little bit about my process. My process is maybe a little bit different than some, but maybe not. But this is how I kind of chunk it. It's one of immersion. I'll spend days, weeks, months, years actually looking at things. One of the images that's in this collection, the rower that's here, I just looked up and she was there. I'd been there for hours, but she just slipped in on me. I had one click of the camera, and then I had to get out of her way because I was on her boat dock. But every once in a while we have those serendipitous gifts that just kind of come along, but it's in the patience is maybe in the preparation, and then being present through maybe time, but it's a moment and it's gone. That's a very special image for me. I had another career. My other career was in healthcare. I loved that career, but when it came to that point of making a decision, okay, so what am I going to do for the rest of my life? After I kind of leave that behind, I said I'm going to go back to my art and start putting my stuff out in the world. And as long as I'm up right now, I plan on continuing to make art. The beauty of art, whether it be in this form or you know, in the form of hollies that's part of this, the whole the whole genesis of this project is when we're thinking about art, how do we, these two things that are very different, how do we put together a centralized theme for it? We said, how about conversation starters? So these are definitely conversation starters.
My name is Holly Ballard Martz. I'm a mixed media artist. I use a variety of media. I use encaustic, I use paint, I use lots of found objects. It just depends what I'm trying to convey, and oftentimes the object drives the work itself and helps me determine what I'm going to do. My dad was in advertising, and so for the long time I thought I was going to be a commercial artist. And that didn't happen. I fell into fine art, which I just loved and couldn't walk away from. I actually have a printmaking background. I went to the University of Washington and have a degree in printmaking. After I left school, I didn't have access to the presses and all of the materials, so I started painting and doing collage work, things I could do easily at home with small children. Took a break actually for quite a while raising my kids, and then decided it was time to really get serious again. I took an encaustic workshop about 5 or 6 years ago and fell in love and was able to incorporate that mixture of materials that I like so much. It's a bodywork that started in 2011 called Crooked Thoughts, and it is about my daughter's struggle with depression and anxiety. And it is my attempt to work through my feelings about it and also to help end the stigma by talking about it and getting it out into the public. The only way we're going to end the stigma of mental illness is by talking about it. You know, casual observers oftentimes don't understand the deep underlying message, and that's okay. They are interested in the texture, they want to know about the technique, particularly if I'm using encaustic, because a lot of people aren't familiar with encaustic. They're interested in the mixture of media, because it's generally not just one thing, there's lots of different things put together. So yeah, a lot of times it's just about technique or color or texture or surface. I troll antique malls and thrift shops, and eBay and Etsy are my good friends, and I'll just look for things, and it often will strike me like, oh, I can reuse this, repurpose this, change the context of it to get my idea across. On some of the smaller panels, there are some little pieces of wood that have circles in them that I found in a thrift shop. I don't know what they were used for. I just liked the look of them. I love circles, I like spheres. They just graphically spoke to me. So oftentimes I'm a collector. I gather lots of things, and it just depends. Things get stashed sometimes for years before I use them. Yes, I'm a bit of a hoarder. Well, inspiration, of course, comes from everywhere as an artist. You're drawing from everything, from people, from words. Language are really important to me. Often a piece starts with language, a phrase, something strikes me, so titles are important to my work. I love text. I incorporate text a lot, and so I think that language is one of the objects in language. You know, the object itself can push me in a certain direction, and a certain phrase will also push me in another direction. There's a piece called Catch Me When I Fall, and it's a net that is comprised of almost 500 medic alert bands, and the bands say fall risk on them. And they're given to patients in the hospital, if the staff is worried about them being able to get out of bed on their own. But I've used it in the context of mental health and the idea of that we're all at risk of falling, and that there's an issue that there's not enough available for people with mental health issues in terms of beds in the state of Washington in psychiatric wards, in terms of any kind of services, mental health providers. There's a real scarcity of that, and there needs to be more. And is there a net to catch you? Oftentimes there's not. This piece is joined together with some red cord, and that knot is called a grief knot. It's a combination of a thief and a granny knot, but to me it spoke the idea of grief, because there's a lot of grief as a parent, as someone who has a loved one struggling. So those two panels are connected with that particular knot called a grief knot. I think artists is all-encompassing, you know? Artists are performers and they're writers and they are collectors. Most artists I know are collectors, whether you know it or not, they are collecting things. And it might just be they're collecting things in the back of their head, that idea that's going to come forward down the road.
The exhibit is free and runs from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Centennial Center Gallery is located at 400 West Gow Street, next to Kent City Hall. Sponsored by Kent Arts Commission.